guest today is one of the great spiritual masters of our time. Applauded, celebrated, awarded the Nobel Prize. One of India's great national inspiration. I'm delighted to welcome. Hello and welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, visions and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today has expanded the boundaries of Indian sculpture. He's reached out deep into the recesses of tradition and yet made himself relevant with a rare vitality to celebrations of form, of movement, of an elevated sense of freedom and spirit. I'm delighted to welcome the great master of sculpture, K.S. Radhakrishnan. Your roots as a sculptor have been in Shantiniketan, a very intense environment under the great Ram Kinkar, who has been your guru. As we record this, this is in a sense a postscript to his centenary. You're involved with creating and curating works as a tribute to this. It's a year late, but nonetheless a celebration. What has been your inheritance, in a sense, from this great sculptor?
I think the current position that I'm entertaining, I got rather in connection with the centenary celebrations as a curator for the show, itself is something that I would say it's something that probably I was looking forward to, have a kind of a chance to give a great tribute to the master, and especially to work on his pieces and to put them together, because it's very, very scattered in terms of his paintings and the sculptures, and there's no proper documentation being made. And it's a real challenging job for someone who knew his nature of work and the way the works are given away to many people. Whoever came closer to Ram Kinkar, they all had a chance to get a painting or a sculpture, because he's one of the sculptors who never lived with what is being done. He always went ahead with the ideas and kept working on things, and those were all in various sites. Like sometimes some of the open air sculptures in Shantiniketan within the campus, and sometimes some of the studio sculptures within the studios which are created in smaller scale are kept in the museums. But somehow all these years there has not been much work done in terms of documentation and research, and this chance I would really say something that I have inherited to really work on, and I feel extremely sort of privileged,
blessed.
Yes, I would say so. Really blessed.
But tell me that apart from the mechanical aspect of putting this together and assembling a diverse collection at many spaces, what do you feel has been your inheritance in terms of the spirit of sculpture that he embodied, or an art?
See, when I went as a student to Shantiniketan in the early 70s, he was not a part of the faculty, but it's just that his sculptures were within the campus and were like lessons to anybody who comes there, and partially, and also my personal association that I built with him, with the help of the current professor then, who put me to Ram Kinkar, and one could make out the way his total approach to his own work, and the kind of, not that we knew his greatness then, but now by working for over a period of time that you understand the relationship that he established with himself and his own work, the kind of sincere approach to oneself, is something probably most of the people really should, or rather understood.
So what was his greatness that you emulate or you're inspired by?
I would really say that the person who really had an extremely sort of his own thought processes, not just what is being seen and then worked. It's a kind of the celebration of life that he had it around, and in terms of getting it expressed with his own work, and a true sincere effort to oneself. I mean, I think it's only a great soul can really practice it.
Do you think it's necessary or useful or important to be a great soul, a great human being, and to be a good artist? And does that great soul, great human being have to be virtuous? Is virtue a necessary component of being a great artist?
Yeah, there are, yeah, it's definitely a sensitive work comes from a sensitive human being, and I always felt that you got to be extremely human in terms of dealing with people. I mean, so what happens is that, but in many cases, that how do you look at it and how do you really make, what sort of an analytical mind that you have in finding that? I mean, are you sensitive enough to others to be with you, So what happens is that in terms of expression, I suppose you get the best when you are really a sensitive human being.
So don't be modest, but do you feel you're a worthy student? And what are the aspects that you have been able to, it's a little bit of an unfair question, but let me ask it. What are some of the strengths that you have, you have qualities you feel you have imbibed? What are some of the aspects that you have failed to?
More than what he taught, I mean, we had chances to learn from him. It's probably because of what he was, his work is what we understood that we should be with our own. And in terms of learning, art is not really taught. I mean, it's something that you really, nobody tells you how to look at things. Many people look at it, but what you see, I mean, it's something else, and everybody looks at the same thing, and then what they see is different. So that to be with oneself, with your own individual, original way of looking at things and seeing it and expressing it in your own way is what probably, I think that's what probably I would say the best of what is an expression is all about. You don't follow any guru in terms of that, because the guru, the teacher tells you certain things, or without telling, you have a kind of a communication that gets built up, and within which you try to get the best. So I think that's,
when I look at your work, I get this, and I said this in the introduction to the program, I get this sort of tremendous sense of flow, of movement, of freedom, of reaching for the heavens, of being uplifted as a common strand, of a quality of the ethereal, of the mystical, of an upward movement and flow. Is that reflective of your personality, of who you are as a human being? Is what I'm getting what you are?
Yeah, see, it's true, Rajiv. Many times that it has been looked at by many people, and also definitely I'm very conscious of the fact that the sculptures are sort of the figures rather are really sort of getting to get it elevated to a kind of a different quality of space. And because most of the pieces that I have been working for the last, say, a few years, and especially with these two characters of Musui and Maya, the Musui, the Sandal boy, who was the primary model to me when I was a student, and the Maya, who is the counterpart, that was created to really for the storytelling goes. That these two characters are, in most cases, they really appear to me more airbound and kind of entertaining as kind of a movement, or rather evoking certain kind of a movement that comes from within. It may be really sort of reflected with their own body, but at the same time, is it just, I think it's probably a kind of, one deals with the mind and the movement. It's probably reflected or expressed through the kind of lineage in terms of the movement and the lineage in terms of a language. So I suppose, yes, it has a kind of an upward movement, but because I want
to in some ways,
yes,
no?
Yes, it's true that the three-dimensional aspect of it to be really sort of experienced by the figure, also the onlooker, for that reason.
You're watching a conversation with the noted, eminent, iconic sculptor K.S. Radhakrishnan. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away.
क्यों है ठंडा।
अपने सर पर योगी राज का हाथ है, अब सिर दर्द टेंशन थकान की बंद कर दो दुकान।
14 जड़ी बूटियों का वरदान योगीराज आयुर्वेदिक ठंडा तेल,
हर बंदा झट से ठंडा।
वैस्मॉल योगीराज ठंडा तेल।
अब बनेंगी भारत में भी विश्व स्तरीय इमारतें। जर्मन टेक्नोलॉजी से बना वर्ल्ड क्लास सीमेंट।
भांगर सीमेंट, सस्ता नहीं सबसे अच्छा।
Welcome back to a continuing conversation with K.S. Radhakrishnan, the sculptor. We were talking about, the quality of movement and the ethereality and the upward aspect of your work. I was also interested in saying in what ways does it express who you are as a human being, because unlike sort of more, other sort of unidimensional art forms in some ways, the three-dimensionality of it, there's only so much that you can pre-plan, I suppose, because you are working with bronze, you're working with a difficult medium to give enduring form and shape, and there is the magic of its unfolding. So somewhere there must be a subliminal expression of what you experience and feel, which is unpredictable. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, I mean, definitely yes. To a certain extent, it's very tough task, definitely, for any individual to really sort of come up with a kind of a verbal description about how.
That's why you're a sculptor, really, because your sculptor expresses you and not words. Otherwise, you'd be a poet or a writer.
So what happens is that in the last series of sculptures that I have been working with, well, they are titled The Freehold. I mean, the very title itself speaks a lot in terms of that you are free to hold, or you are free from any of the hold that really comes from an external source. So if at all these figures, any of these figures, which were done in probably about more than 20 pieces were done on a larger scale, and these figures, the male and the female, Musuya and Maya, and they are clinging on to a pillar. The pillar which has, sort of, again, I would really put them like kind of a human pillar, which has embossed small figures projecting from the surface, like low relief temple sculptures. And those figures having very minimum contact on the pillar, and at the same time, I mean, that itself shows that how much of the kind of, they're freeing themselves, and also by working on this series, as a sculptor, you free yourself from certain kind of unwanted or wanted, I don't know, certain things that stays in your memories, and you are sort of getting certain things that eliminated.
So it's like cathartic, it's a release.
Yes, a kind of a lightness that you experience by expressing these pieces. So you freehold yourself. I mean, when you say Musui, I mean, it's like kind of you depict it through a kind of a character, that the kind of movement that happens in one's own mind.
Do you have a larger image or a larger story inside of you about these two characters, beyond sort of the end processes of your creativity that we see in sculpture? I mean, do they have an identity? Do they live for you? Do they have histories? Do they,
It's true. To start with, definitely you interact with a kind of a character that has become an important characteristic in your own work. But then what you refer from, what you start from, it's something a kind of a starting point, and then you depart. You don't really sort of, then what happens to that Musui, that whom I met when I was 19, is not what is important then, because probably I was the same age when I met him.
Was there a real character?
Yes, Musui was a real character, a Santal boy, a tribal in Bengal, because Shantiniketan is sort of situated around, the Santal villages, and this is one of the Santal boy whom I had a chance to interact, and he became a kind of a model for me. For a few years I worked with him, but that time he was just a model. So when I left Shantiniketan and coming to Delhi years back in 1981, then I had carried only his head, and that has become a permanent fixture in my studio. So now over a period, what happens is that you you recollect, you develop certain ideas based on him, and also it's again you're parting from what exactly you have had with him, but then you become one with the character. So it's definitely a living character for me, since you are dealing with your own self. I mean, your sculptures can never be seen in isolation. It has so much of you in it that it's definitely a living character, because it has to be kept alive. It has to be kept experiencing, and there has to be a series of expressions based on that. So that's a never-ending process, because you have a particular series of sculptures being made, and then you shift to maybe a kind of a different looks in terms of the next series, but then it's all interconnected. It's highly, you don't really sort of make abrupt changed versions of your own statements.
Do you keep an audience in mind? That you want to get rid of this, or you want to express this, whatever knots, intuitions, feelings in your brain, and there is this process of catharsis, and you give it form and shape. Do you also keep in mind how the audience is going to receive it, see it, interpret it, or is this the process outward and completion?
I suppose I think like any sculptor or any artist, I suppose they have a kind of, they want to really reach out to the people. They want the idea that you are carrying it and expressing it has to naturally, really felt by the people who looks at it, or who really want I let them touch the sculpture, because it's not just physically, it has a presence, physical presence. It evokes various kinds of moods in various given conditions. Now what happens is that like the last series, the ramp, with the series of people walking onto the ramp with Ramakrishna in the middle, standing as an idol, and with the same feature, the way Ramakrishna was given Musui's feature, like the people on the ramp also had the same feature. So it's like to sort of to clearly mention the fact that to be perfect also can be human. I mean, you don't have to really, it's not something that comes from some other world that you become a perfect human being. It's one become larger than life from the life itself.
You're watching a conversation with the great Indian contemporary sculptor K.S. Radhakrishnan. We'll be right back after a short break. Don't go away.
अर्ज किया है, दिले नादां तुझे हुआ क्या है?
वाह 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 वाह।
ज्यादा प्रॉफिट बनाने की दवा क्या है? एक और मुलाजा फरमाया, दूर से देखा तो।
अब शेरो शायरी होगी हर जगह। सब्सक्राइब करो शेरो शायरी, ओनली ऑन BSNL।
ये है लाला धनी राम जी, बेईमानी में बड़े नाम जी, माल तोलते वजन घटाकर करे मिलावट आंख चुराकर।
ऐसे धोखेबाजों को सबक सिखाओ, ना सुने आपकी तो मामूली फी देकर कंज्यूमर फोरम में शिकायत दर्ज कराओ। जागो ग्राहक जागो।
नया सवेरा, अपने अधिकार को जानो।
कोई भी दुकानदार कुछ भी बेचता हो, अगर आपको शिकायत हो तो कंज्यूमर फोरम में शिकायत दर्ज कराएं।
Welcome back to a continuing conversation with the sculptor K.S. Radhakrishnan. You have exhibited and have installations around the world. Is sculpture in that sense, in any sense, significant sense, culture specific? We were talking about keeping audiences in mind. Is there a different sensibility? I mean, at one level, of course, art is universal, but yet you're working with the Santal boy as your iconic image. There are associations and intuitive responses that may happen closer to Shantiniketan. When you're in Delhi, they'll probably be different, and Paris and Berlin and the rest of the world where you've exhibited will be different. Do you plan for that in some ways? Are you conscious of it?
Yes, I think the sculpture finds its relevant space, whichever part of the world, because I deal with human, and so it has its relevance wherever there are people, because human sensibilities are something that really has to be, that it reach out to, that whether I am working with the Sandal boy as a Musri as the Sandal boy, and but then the whole human story in its own spirit is definitely looked at by the people, well, maybe coming from varied cultural background, like the current piece that I have done, it was in Shantiniketan.
This was a tribute to Ram Kinkar.
That's right.
Yes.
It was a chance that had come to me in connection with the centenary year. I was invited to do a sculpture for the permanent collection. So I felt that the permanent collection that goes instead, goes to a museum, but instead I would like to really get closer to the footsteps of the teacher that I worked with, like by making a large monumental sculpture. And sincerely speaking, I had that in mind, the kind of specific site. And I never knew that I would get that. And it was difficult for me to ask for that site. But it so happened that I went and installed the sculpture, the kind of site which is appropriate for the reason that it was within the campus where students normally get gathered, next, adjacent to the canteen, where there is a kind of, because the sculpture depicts Musui comes as a fly. He comes and sits on a tall column, very tall than many of these series that I have done, probably the largest, tallest sculpture that I have done. A large column on the top, Musui comes as a terra fly. I call it a terra fly. Terra is, that this earth, and fly is related to the sky. So it's like the terra fly, that sort of taking an aerial view of what's happening around. Because if it's definitely above many of the people who are walking around, they don't see sometime, but there is somebody keeping a watch on your steps, which you cannot escape from. You may be conscious, you may not be, but there is definitely a consciousness above, which you cannot get away. So this, I wanted to give an image to the consciousness by placing Musui as a character and kept at an angle that definitely he is keeping an eye on everyone. That was the last large open air installation that I have had it.
But tell me, that was the story that you wished the sculptor to tell. Without narrating the story, in what ways and to what degree did people receive this intent behind it?
You see, Rajiv, it's like this. Most of the cases you would see that people are not trained to look at a sculpture. Even this program itself is something that would probably give
well,
at least to a different
sure.
number of people who are watching it. I think all kinds of efforts of this kind really led people's mind to open up and a way of looking at it, a way of seeing it. So how many are really sort of understanding the same spirit with which a work of art is done?
Sure.
So I think one needs to be trained, educated, and any effort in that direction, wherever there's a chance for us to go and listen to or go and talk to, we make use of it and talk about how it is to be looked at, what I mean by that. Do you really also see the same what I felt, that you should be looking at this way? So, well, why not? I think this is the only way that, today, how do we really look at some of the images, even the temple sculptures done centuries ago, but then we really try to study things and then understand it. I don't think that by going to one of the temple sculptures we would really understand what it was and how it was done and all. So I suppose this way of giving some kind of a thing or understanding how others looked at it and then they really let you know, well, this is what I am saying, fairly good enough. You really have a kind of a flow in terms of communication in the process.
And yet, interestingly, that you can often get something out of it that maybe the artist didn't intend.
Very
and
true,
there is still, a gratification. There is an insight. There is a feeling, an emotion that is evoked in it. Do you have working in bronze at a time when people are exploring so many new mediums and materials? The bronze is the classical.
Yes.
It has associations with history. It has associations with immortality. Do you have a sense of immortality?
I suppose the nature of figures that I create probably cannot be done in any other medium. One reason I take to bronze is for that reason. And also, since I have chosen to do it in bronze, I think I do what the bronze can give me the best. I mean, that's the way one really would want it to be. But then at the same time, you know that when Ramkinkar made the sculptures in concrete, probably that was the strongest medium that he could. Because, because plaster of Paris and clay or terracottas. Of course, terracotta varies in China, that those centuries old are still in good shape. But because concrete, it was done in concrete, that we had the chance to see it even in in the 80s when we went there. We had the sculptures are still intact. So one is conscious of the fact that it should have a life for a longer period, and also because of bronze, I could create the fly. With the, it's really sort of positioned in such a manner that I think bronze really can make it happen.
And also, that how conscious are you, when you're looking at a painting or a photograph, that there are predetermined lights that are frozen, and it's it's unidimensional. And I suppose you look at the color temperature of the light to make sure that the colors you have intended and the texture shows. But because of the three-dimensionality of sculpture, and particularly not just sculpture that are in museums and in a controlled environment, but in public spaces, the perspective and the angles and the positioning is so dramatically fluid. How do you compensate?
Very true. It's very good because it's definitely studied prior to the installation, that which way it should be really facing, and what's the kind of light that is coming from in each given conditions, and what the way it really it's meant to evoke the same spirit or not. But then it's a really kind of a rediscovering it each time that you look at it, because its lighting is different, and also very many climatic conditions. The sculpture has a kind of it evoke in a different mood. It really
is it all sort of visualized inside of your head? I know you make little models before you make the large ones, but then you put two different kinds of lighting and try and look at how it might.
Normally in the maquette state, you don't really look at them in terms of the lights and conditions, because at the site you decide, you write the script at the location itself. That's something that you improvise, because that comes with the kind of experience of how you cannot explain very well about it, but it really is there. It really works in the corner of your mind. You are very conscious of the fact that it is meant to be seen this way, and because that's why a book is not done in one day. It takes its own course of time to really see it and make it, or seeing it and showing it. Both. It happens in the process.
This process that you've been talking about of creativity and catharsis, but what is it that keeps a sculptor going? A sculptor will probably keep making sculptures for as long as he can physically. Is there a goal? Is a point reached when all the knots in the brain, the catharsis is complete? What is it that keeps you going? Is there a destination? Is it just a journey? Is there this, if you're, I guess if you're, an actor, you want to win the Oscar. And I guess increasingly for a lot of artists, for some artists at least, that you want to sell at Christie's or wherever it is for, $1 billion or £1 million. There is some yardstick of completeness.
No.
So do you have one?
No, I'm sorry. I don't have any as such, which is a kind of a defined kind of a destination as that this is what I am trying to attain. No. I mean, I think the whole process of being with it, the whole it's like kind of would you like to really make an end to your own life? No, you don't want to.
In the sense that in life, we say, you may want to reach a certain sense of perfection. If you're a religious person, you want to say that I want enlightenment. If you're a politician, you say you want to be prime minister or president or whatever it is. So I was just wondering that is that perfection the goal? Is it attainable, or is it always just the boundaries keep extending?
No, I think the boundaries keep extending, and you are always after it, and you will always be. I mean, that's what probably it's not like kind of. I mean, you create life. You don't. You have life around. You don't imitate them the way you don't do that. You keep creating it, and life goes. I mean, there's no end to what you can do. You feel, and there is no end to what one can really, sort of in terms of sculpture or as a language, that you have the way you stop experiencing, then the expression comes to an end. So as long as you have experiences that are lined up, it's happening every moment, you know, and then the expression is definitely a follow-up to that. So I think and once you express, again you experience that. So it's a kind of two ends sort of are connected to keep rolling as a circle, and there's no end to where it started or where it's begin to wait, or then it's a process that continues forever. And I would really see that one can be active enough to really express that.
So here's celebrating a lifetime of unraveling sculptures and great creativity. Thank you very much. This has been a great privilege. Quite wonderful. Thank you. And yet made himself relevant with a rare vitality to celebrations of form, of movement, of an elevated sense of freedom and spirit. I'm delighted to welcome the great master of sculpture, K.S. Radhakrishnan. Your roots as a sculptor have been in Shantiniketan, a very intense environment under the great Ram Kinkar, who has been your guru. As we record this is in a sense a postscript to his centenary. You're involved with creating.
There's no proper documentation being made, and it's a real challenging job for someone who knew his nature of work and the way the works are given away to many people. Whoever came closer to Ram Kinkar, they all had a chance to get a painting or a sculpture, because he's one of the sculptors who never lived with what is being done. He always went ahead with ideas and kept working on things, and those were all in various sites. Like sometimes some of the open air sculptures in Shantiniketan within the campus, and sometimes some of the studio sculptures within the studios which are created in smaller scale are kept in the museums. But somehow all these years there has not been much work done in terms of documentation and research, and this chance I would really say something that I have inherited to really work on, and I feel extremely sort of privileged,
blessed.
Yes, I would say so. Really blessed.
But tell me that apart from the mechanical aspect of putting this together and assembling a diverse collection at many spaces, what do you feel has been your inheritance in terms of the spirit of sculpture that he embodied, or an art?
See, when I went as a student to Shantiniketan in the early 70s, he was not
and curating works as a tribute to this. It's a year late, but nonetheless a celebration. What has been your inheritance, in a sense, from this great sculptor?
I think the current position that I'm entertaining, or I got rather in connection with the centenary celebrations as a curator for the show, itself is something that I would say I have, it's something that probably I was looking forward to have a kind of a chance to give a great tribute to the master, and especially to work on his pieces and to put them together, because it's very scattered in terms of his paintings and the sculptures and the
guest today is one of the great spiritual masters of our time. Applauded, celebrated, awarded the Nobel Prize. One of India's great national inspiration. I'm delighted to welcome him. welcome to my series of conversations with men and women whose ideas, visions and philosophy define our contemporary world. My guest today has expanded the boundaries of Indian sculpture. He's reached out deep into the recesses of tradition